Welcome to the F50 Woman Podcast, dedicated to sharing stories from a diverse community of women in order to provoke you into a passionate pursuit of life, build unshakable character, and achieve extraordinary things. Now, here is your host, Julia Jack.
She came out of the womb wanting to explore the world, and once she found kayaking at camp, her love for the outdoors was solidified. But like the rest of us, she had to grow up. So she shifted her focus and went to school. It would take her 8 years to earn her bachelor's degree, but she never stopped looking to see what was on the horizon. She would finally rise and realize that it was the blend of exploration, adventure, and people that made her her. Tune in and listen to this chat with Zoë Routh, leader, coach, and overcomer, and another strong and steady F50 woman. Hey, F50 woman audience. Thank you so much. Today we are here with Zoë Routh. And I pronounce that well, Zoë Routh. She's a leadership expert specializing in the people stuff, which I love because that is the key to all things, in my opinion. But we're going to hear what Zoë says about it. She's the expert. She is the author of 4 books. She's a business leader and the producer of the Zoë Routh Leadership Podcast. So thank you so much for being here, Zoë.
Julia, it's a pleasure. I'm glad we finally managed to tee up the time zones and make it work.
Yes. You know what's really great, though, is that probably before the pandemic happened, I might not even have thought that I could meet and connect with someone like you so far away. So I think this is great. This is an incredible forum.
It is absolutely an incredible forum. I remember, people are listening to my accent and going, why does she not sound more Australian? It's because I grew up in Canada and I came to Australia 25 odd years ago. And before I got the job at Outward Bound, which took me to Australia, I rang up Outward Bound New Zealand to ask if they could give me a job. And I was so naive. I didn't know anything about the world really. And I didn't know about time zones. I rang them at 2:00 in the morning.
Yeah.
And they answered the phone, which was amazing.
Which was even more. Hello. Yeah.
Yeah, but didn't make a great first impression. So I was too embarrassed to follow through and to put a job application in there. So I applied to Outward Bound Australia later.
Okay. Wow, what a story. Yeah, lessons about time zones. Got to look those up. So I'd love for everybody to get to know who you are. So from when you were younger, how did you start? So tell us a little bit about younger Zoë. What was she like? What did she want to be? What did she dream about? And who were you?
Well, my mom says I burst out of the womb ready for action. And I was always wanting to go off and explore the world. So much so that when she was pregnant with my younger sister, and because we were very close in age, so she would have been 9 months pregnant. And I would have been, 9 months plus. Well, anyway, there's almost a year, less than a year between me and my sister. So I was still, just started walking and I wouldn't stick around the yard. I was always wanting to wander off. And so my mom had to tie a rope around me to keep me penned in so I wouldn't wander off because she was so huge and pregnant with my sister.
Right.
And I think that sort of showed the tone of what my life has been about, which is all about discovery and exploration, always wanting to see what's on the horizon. So younger Zoë going through school was a bit independent, a bit strong-headed, a bit rebellious, a bit black sheep-like.
Okay.
So didn't really have a great teenagerhood, I have to say. Like I was pretty emotionally up and down and had big fights with my dad in particular. Somehow I managed to survive all that. And one of the best things that happened to me was getting out to summer camp and going on long wilderness canoe trips. And that was only because my summer camp counselor from resident camp said, hey, you should try this. It'll be sunshine every day. It'll be hanging out with other people in the boats, and it'll be just like a cruisy, wonderful summer. I'm like, sounds fantastic.
Yeah.
So I went on a 3-week canoe trip and it chucked rain every single day. I'm like, where is the sunshine and sun tanning? And
there goes the sales pitch. Yeah.
Oh my God. It It was a disaster. And what I discovered is that I loved it. I loved it. I loved being within a small group of people in a beautiful remote area, challenging ourselves, discovering what we were all about, making really firm friendships. And that laid the bedrock for everything else in my universe, essentially, because I got addicted right away. I went back the next summer and did a 6-week canoe trip, and then went back every summer after that to lead trips at summer camp, and did that for years and years and years. And that brought me to apply for doing outdoor experiential education here in Australia with Outward Bound, where I led groups through different parts of Australia with a whole personal and leadership development focus. And I kept learning and growing. So the themes for me have been about exploration. They've been about adventure. They've also been really strongly about people, and blending those two together has been one of the most important things for me throughout my career. So that's a little bit of an insight into who I am, all the rough bits and fun bits.
Yes. When you grabbed onto that adventure and that and being outside and all of that, were your parents or was your mom in particular surprised after knowing who you were as a little one?
Were they surprised? No, in Canada, you send your kids off to summer camp, as is often the case in America. Like summer camp is a big thing in North America. It is not at all a thing in Australia. The summer camps don't really exist here. Mostly because summer is over December, January. So sending me off to camp and seeing how much I enjoyed it, that was one thing. They were then started to marvel at the, doing 3-week and 6-week canoe trips was kind of like, whoa, that's huge. I think there was a big decision I made when I was about 25, because I'd spend my summers at summer camp and then go to university to try and get through my degree. It took forever. It took me 8 years to finish off my degree.
Wow. Perseverance.
So oh my God. Yeah. Like I started studying education. Then I didn't like the education degree. So I swapped to English literature because I knew I liked reading and writing. And then there was a love story in there, which derailed me for a little bit. So I went back part-time and worked part-time. Anyway, so that was a long-winded circular answer to your question. Was my mom surprised? No, I don't think so. When I first left for Canada for Australia for 2 years, they're like, when are you coming home? When are you coming home? When are you coming home? I'm like, I don't know. And they stopped asking after that. So it was, instead of when are you moving home, it became when are you visiting? So I think that was really hard to have their daughter at the other end of the planet, because it's a long way to go to visit. And we certainly felt that in COVID for sure.
Even more so. Yes. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah.
So from that young girl who came out of the womb as an adventurer to this grown, wonderful woman who's an adventurer and a leader, how did you get from one point to the other? I imagine it wasn't this seamless, I just found myself and I've been just great ever since. Tell us a little bit about the lesson, maybe the one pivot point that changed everything for you, or the lesson or lessons you learned in between those 2 points.
Yeah, there's lots of like significant moments that kind of poke you in the forehead and we're like, wow, I really learned something about myself there. Whether it's letting down friends or getting a piece of feedback from a boss, that was really confronting about how my behavior, my attitude was affecting others. I think that was a really big point of awareness for me too, when I got some feedback like that from my boss at summer camp, Jason. If you ever listen to this, Jason, hat tip to you. He told me I was too emotional. And I went, what do you mean I'm too emotional?
Yeah, not the emotional word. What?
Too passionate. And I'm like, I reacted in an emotional way. So that was one of the pieces of feedback. Another piece of feedback that I had was that I can be intimidating, which I found completely surprising. And apparently I have no filters on my facial expressions. So whatever I'm thinking and feeling kind of erupts through my face, and people misinterpret that a lot. So I discovered to be more mindful of that and to be more considerate of other people and how I show up around them. And also to be aware that because I was in a position of leadership at summer camp, that authority actually accentuates everything you do. And that was a pretty big insight. I think, so there was those kind of lessons. And then the life lesson, I think that was probably the hardest and the biggest was when I got cancer at 35.
Wow.
And I'd just gotten engaged to my husband. Well, now husband, but became my fiance. And a week later, I found out I had cancer. I was like, wow. And my mom remembers that as one phone call. I'm like, no, actually, Mom, it was 1 week was one question, was one piece of news. And then the next week was the bad news.
Yeah.
But it all kind of blended together. And that was a really tough time.
And what did you get sick? How did that happen? Did something else happen that you said, let me see a doctor, or no?
I'd been training for a marathon.
Okay.
And so, and I was feeling really tired. Like when you train for a marathon, you are really tired.
Yes.
You run for 3+ hours and it's like the rest of the day you're on the couch, recovering. And so, but this one particular run, I remember it very clearly. It was hot out, like it always is in summer in Australia.
Yeah.
I got to mile 37 or kilometer 37, I should say, which is about 24 miles or so, maybe 22 miles. And I just stopped running. I just started walking, and I was training with my husband. So he ran on for about a couple hundred meters, and then he realized I wasn't still running. He came back and he said, "We're almost home. Like, what's up?" Yeah. I'm like, I can't. I'm done. And he's like, "No, that's weird." So it was this weird fatigue, and we went the following week on holiday, and I thought the holiday would, lift me. Yeah. And it didn't. And I was still bone tired. I'm like, this is not quite right. So I went for my regular checkups, and it's during the checkup, the doctor went, "Oh, that's not normal. Wow, we're sending you off to the specialist." And we went through that whole, it's like life picked up and then got plonked on a different road, and down that road of medical interventions and cancer treatment, we went.
You went.
And so that was a big, was it a sliding? It wasn't a sliding doors moment because it wasn't a moment of choice. It was a kind of rerouting moment. Yeah. The sliding doors moment kind of came a little bit later, which it really did feel like, which path should we go? Are we going to be taken on next? Yes. And that was when we tried a few years later going through IVF to have babies. Okay. And we had one obstacle after another through that whole process. And anybody else looking in and go, maybe the universe is trying to tell you something. Like every time you try to do something, you get slapped back. Excuse me. And in any case, in case I was missing the message, which I clearly was after a few years of trying this, on my 40th birthday, after we decided this was going to be our last round, that was it, you know? Yeah. I got my period, and that was it. Game over. No babies. And so that was the moment where our lives got picked up and put on a different track. Instead of the parenting track, it was now the no children track. Right. And what did that life look like? Yeah. And that was pretty tough. Like I remember getting home. I was traveling for work at this time when I got my period, and I had to travel a couple different flights to get home and hold my stuff together enough to get home, close the door, and just lie down on the kitchen floor and cry my heart out, just grieving for the life that wasn't going to be. Yeah. And after I did that for a little while, for about an hour, I got up and exhausted and went, okay, this life is what we are going to lean into now. Wow. And that was kind of big. And my husband and I had talked about it, like what happens if we can't, and what would our life look like? And we'd had a really good conversation about that. It's like, well, it'd be amazing with kids, and it's amazing without, because we'll travel every year, we'll renovate our house, we'll do all this life of freedom and adventure. So both lives were looking good, but it's hard when you feel like the choice is not yours in the end. Yes. And you just that closed off.
And the door closes. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Well, it sounds like you guys have a good relationship, that you talked about it, and that you were not that thing that your boss told you, emotional to this point where you couldn't consider the options. I've never been through IVF, but I imagine that you just want it so bad that I don't want to hear any other option. I feel like it's
different for every person.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Like some women are like, that's all they ever want. They won't consider another life, and they get really attached to that. And then there's women like me who are like, I think I want it. Right. I'm not sure. I'm scared. And that was more me. That was more my approach. But your point about emotional intelligence was certainly true. So I spent a lot of years after that comment from Jason, my boss, really thinking and exploring emotional intelligence and learning how to sit more with my feelings and not be at their whim. And I really felt driven by emotions before that. And I learned how to, through a lot of self-development work and research and learning, how to experience emotions without having them be in the driver's seat. I think if I let's take them out of the driver's seat, they go in the passenger seat and my higher self is in charge. I can still experience these emotions, observe them, but don't feel like caught up in their stranglehold.
Yes. That's such incredible advice that I wish I had, I don't know, 30 years ago, because they really do. They wash over you and then you float away with them and there you go. And then later on, when you get your sensibilities back, you're like, oh gosh, what did I just do? Wasted a whole lot of time. That's why I'm just so impressed and encouraged by the fact that you got it out. You cried. An hour later, you got up and said, all right, well, this is what we got to do next.
I have to say, though, it wasn't the only time I cried about it. It comes back in waves.
Waves, yes. I understand.
And I think even now, so how old am I now? 51. Occasionally there'll be these little spikes of moments where I'm like, oh, I'm thinking about that life down that other road that hasn't happened, and a little bit of sadness for that. And then it's like, okay. And it just, I feel it and I let it go and we move on.
Yes. Yeah. So it's real so you're human, right? Yeah. And it's like a mourning process. And or if you lost a parent, sometimes you look at the picture and you think, wow, I miss you. But you have to move on. So tell us about you now. What do you do now? I know you talked about, I shared the leadership training, your podcast. Tell us about your books. Tell us about what you do now and who you are now.
So I've been running my own leadership development practice full-time since 2014. So 7 or 8 years now. And there's different things that I do for people. I have a program called Amplifiers for CEOs, managing directors, and general managers from all sorts of different sectors. And that's advanced leadership development in a cohort of peers so that they can learn from each other. So that's one of my primary pieces of work that I do. I also work with leaders in their teams to work on two things generally, either their strategy or their culture, or sometimes both together, because obviously the two are linked, and good culture is good strategy. So I love doing that kind of work with teams. I also do leadership training where I train on specific leadership skills, whether it's difficult conversations or strategic thinking, that kind of stuff. So that's the tactical stuff. The books, I've written 4 leadership books, and I've just finished writing my first novel, which is very exciting.
Okay.
Yeah, that was a whole new challenge.
You don't have to give it all away unless is it published yet?
Not yet. It's with the editor. Yeah.
Okay, so don't give it all away.
Going through that phase.
Yeah, give us a little taste of what that's going to be.
Sure. It's about, there's a competition for a provider to create the first moon community. And this is about a cohort of developers, I call them world builders, who are having to go through a selection period and design a prototype on Earth in order to win the gig to go to the moon and build this environment. And it focuses around the question of how can we build a world worth living in, and whether that's on the planet or off the planet. But that's the central premise. And the reason I wrote this book is I was writing my last book, People Stuff, which won Book of the Year, which is amazing. And I was thinking during the writing of that book, I wonder if fiction might be a better, or at least a different way of exploring leadership messages.
Yes.
And because I was reading Ursula K. Le Guin at the time, and her work was really powerful and was moving me. I'm like, wow, I wonder if I could write a leadership book that had elements of that. And that could move people in a different way and get them to think about leadership questions in a different way. Because nonfiction books are very didactic. It's like, this is what I think, this is what you should do, go away and do it.
Yeah.
And fiction really just gets you to explore life and perspective from a different angle and get you to ask questions about what you would do, what you think. So that's sort of where that book is all about. It's the draft title is The Olympus Project.
Okay.
So we'll see if that survives a chopping board or not.
Right.
And we expect it to be out probably February or March 2022.
Very good. Now tell me, I want to sneak behind the golden curtain there. Tell me, when you're working with CEOs and leaders, what is one of the most challenging um, issues or things that you deal with when you deal with a group of CEOs? I don't know. I just see it as a room full of egos, or a room full of people who really know their stuff, even if it's not ego and it's not negative, but just a group of people who know their stuff. What is the toughest thing you deal with when you get them in a circle? Maybe there isn't one, because maybe.
No, I don't find working with them tough. Like, there's
Right.
not a challenge for me. I
Okay.
think it's the challenges that they face that
Okay.
I think are the hard work.
Okay.
So in our last Amplifiers Roundtable, say, for example, we always start with checking in for hearing about people's triumphs and challenges. And in this particular meeting, going around the room,
Mm-hmm.
there were people whose sisters were in hospital, whose husbands had a stroke, where people were, their business colleague was in the hospital after a really horrendous accident. Like, they were having full-on things happen in their lives during COVID, and as well as pressures on their business. So that's the hard stuff. They have so many balls in the air, and all these personal, in some cases, traumas happening as well. And they've got to show up every day to connect and be of service to their organization and their teams. And I think that is the hard work. For me, I hold the space. I hold them all there, and I help them to connect with one another so they can feel like that their fears, their challenges, that they're not alone. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges that CEOs face, is they can feel very much alone. If they have a board, not all of them have boards that report to, but if they do have a board, then there's the challenges of dealing with the accountability and communication with the board, and sometimes the personality and tensions that exist there, or they might have troubles in their staff and their staffing, which they have to contend with. So they're kind of like monkey in the middle in some ways, and or at least the vice grip between two factions. And I think that is an enormous piece of the pressure. The ones that end up in my program don't have the big swagger egos, because those types of CEOs are not interested in the kind of program that I'm delivering, which is all about expanding perspective and deep self-awareness.
Okay.
You're not ready for that if you've got the swagger and thinking I know everything. It's only when you realize you don't know everything that you stump up for a program that is about learning.
That makes complete sense. Yeah. Otherwise they're thinking, I'm good. What do I need your program for?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Hopefully they'll all get there, whoever is out there listening.
If you are enjoying the F50 Woman podcast, don't forget to share your positive comments and ratings, and share us on all your favorite social media channels. F50 Woman is a movement created for women, spread by women. Thank you for your support. Now back to the show and your host, Julia Jack.
Did you have a mentor yourself, or who helped you to get to this point? Well, you did talk about your boss and talking about emotional intelligence, but was there any other mentor that helped you either with your business or personally through any of these or all of these challenges?
Yeah, sure.
Who did you lean on?
There's been different mentors that planted seeds for me. So that's one way I've had mentors. Okay. And one of the first ones was when I was about 17, and I just started work at summer camp for my first summers. I was like the youngest staff member on crew. I turned 17 during staff training, and which is really young to be working at summer camp. But anyway, and we were playing pool on a day off, and we were talking about going on trail, which is leading canoe trips. And he goes, "Oh, you could do my job one day," which was to be head of the trail department and heading up the expedition leaders. I'm like, that blew my mind. I'm like, I'm just started work as a summer camp counselor, let alone had the aspirations to lead canoe trips, which I did have, which I thought would be amazing and scary. Then to be in charge of those people, like that was just not on my radar and self-concept at all. But he planted that seed. And a few years later, I did end up applying for that job and getting it and doing it and loving it. Wow. So that was Brent. He was a fabulous man. And there was another similar type of thing with one of the women at summer camp who said, you should apply to camp. So actually, because that was a kind of a pivot moment too.
Yeah.
That summer, where I was going to be 17, my alternative to going to summer camp was to work at some shop, make money, and buy a car. That was like my grand plan. And that would have been a very different life. But she said, yeah, come and work at summer camp. I think you could do it. I'm like, oh, okay. And then I think the other big seed that was planted for me was Sam Robinson, who was the operations manager at Outward Bound. So my boss at the time. And she was reviewing some of my work. So I was head of staff and training at that point, and we'd set up Outward Bound to be a registered training organization. It was a certification process, and we were about to be audited for that. So to get our certification, she came in to review all the stuff I'd put together, and she's like, you could run your own business, I was like, what? like zero self-concept of myself as a business owner. And I think those were mentors who planted seeds was one way that I've been mentored. And another couple of different ways where I've actively sought out mentors, that's shifted for me. So that sort of happened in when was I hired my first coach? In 2002. So at 32, I started to seek mentors. And then for my business management, I actively sought out different types of mentors for specific things that I wanted. Yeah. I was part of Thought Leaders community for about 6 or 7 years, which had a very strong cohort of established trainers, teachers, consultants, business leaders, so that I could leverage everything that they knew about how to do this successfully. Yeah. So that was an active seeking out of mentors and methodologies. And I have a sales mentor. I have a podcast mentor. I've sort of zeroed in on what are the specific things I need to develop in order to take my work and connection to the next level. So that's how I've surreptitiously been mentored and actively pursued mentorship.
Okay. And when you actively pursue these mentors, where do you find them? Do you find people who are doing it on your own, or do you get advice? Do you just happen into them? How's that worked for you?
Thought Leaders, I was actively looking for a community, and I was looking at different places in order to find the support that I needed. And I wanted a proven methodology to help me be a business success. Okay. And so this was kind of a serendipitous exposure to Matt Church's work. So the way I ended up in Thought Leaders is I left my job, started my own practice full time, and I had a speaking gig booked, like my first official speaking gig. And I went, oh my God, I don't know how to do this professionally. I better learn. And so I knew that Matt Church was one of the best in the business, and he had a speakership program, a training program. So I went and did that program. And he'd just launched Thought Leaders Business School. So I'm like, I'm going to find out about this business school stuff because it sounds kind of what I want, but it's expensive.
What you're looking for, yeah.
And so that's where I found out about that. So I think for me, it's been, there's a specific thing I wanted to learn, and I researched, got personal recommendations, and sought them out that way.
Okay, good. And that's worked for you. Seems like it's working for you. Good.
Yeah.
So what is one piece of advice as you stand here right now, 51-year-old Zoe, what would you advise your 17-year-old Zoe if you were to meet her now? Yeah,
I love this question. I actually did an exercise recently on my birthday, reflecting back on life lessons from 20 years ago. So it's 17 years old. I guess it was how old am I now? They're my 31-year-old self, but it applies equally to 17.
Yeah.
I thought I'd read what I wrote in my journal when I did this exercise. It was a while ago now. Is that all right with you?
That's beautiful. Yes.
Thank you, Julia. Okay. So this is what I wrote to my younger self.
Okay.
Ahead of you, you have heartbreak, but it shall be as an egg cracking, a nut breaking, a bloom emerging from the bud. That's probably too many metaphors in one sentence, but there you go.
I love it.
You will discover a strength, a rawness within you. You will make many courageous decisions and set a course of creative independence. You will falter and fail with many moments of self-doubt. It will be hard. You will rise again stronger. You will know illness. You will dance with mortality and face down demons. You will let go and let live. You will find love and be loved deeply. You will have many travels and adventures with your love. It shall be a blessing and a strength and a sanctuary. You will leap again and again into the unknown, learning to fly as you leap. There's more, but I thought that was probably the best bit.
That's nice. It reminds me of, like, for example, we had a meeting and one woman's mother passed away, and she was trying to explain to us what it felt like when people said certain things to her. They just hit wrong. You know, when people die, people say stupid, like, oh, he's in heaven, don't worry about it. You know, things like that hurt. Yeah. And then maybe 2 years later, my father passed away. And as I was reintroducing myself sort of to people, to friends after you finish mourning, people said stupid things. But the great thing about that is I was prepared, because I knew people are going to say things. They love you, but they're going to say things that are just not, because they don't understand what you're feeling.
Yeah.
And so when you read that letter, I felt like if you can hear that when you're younger, you're going to have some hard stuff, but you're going to go through it, you know, knowing that it's going to be hard. When you go through it, you're like, okay, my older self told me that I'm going to go through this hard patch and we'll make it through. So yeah, I thought that was beautiful. Yeah.
I think there's more of us should have conversations with our older selves too. So, you know, I can talk about 61-year-old Zoe, but I often converse with 80-year-old Zoe and get her perspective on what I should be doing or thinking about this stuff now. And that's also a good conversation. So
tell us about that. That's so interesting. I never thought about that. Yeah. Conversation with your older self.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the exercises I have my CEOs do is imagine that it's their 100th birthday and they've got everybody they love around them, and they want to talk about their important life lessons they've had through their life and what was important to them at the age of 100. So they project forward, you know, they've had 100 years on the planet, what has been essential for them. And I take that kind of concept and converse with older Zoe. And so I imagine myself at 80 looking back on this particular challenge, whatever it is that I'm facing, whether it's a business decision or a staffing decision or a personal issue. And I think, what would my 80-year-old self say about this moment 30 plus years on from here? Yeah. And she has some wisdom to tell me. And I think that wisdom is our higher self talking, the one that rises above the nitty gritty of what we're experiencing now, to pull out the essence of who we are and to remind ourselves that we are stronger than we think and that this too shall pass. All these cliches, but cliches are cliches because they're true. Yeah. So those elements are really helpful. And I visualize what I want to be at 80 to help me make decisions now to lead in that direction. That's the other way I converse with my 80-year-old self. I get my 80-year-old self to thank my 50-year-old self for the decisions I make now to bring me to a healthy, happy state then. Yeah. So that's another way I talk to my older self.
Okay. That's cool. I like that concept. I'm having a hard time picturing what I'm going to say to older Julia, but I like it. Maybe I'll try it and see what she says. She'll probably take it over. Right. Yeah. Very nice. So what is next for you? What's on deck?
So writing fiction is part of my 10-year plan, in that I want to be writing more. So I love the process of writing, and I'm trying not to put too much pressure on myself on my first novel, because like anything you do for the first time, it's rough and you got to learn the craft. Yeah. So I think that's what I want to keep on doing. I enjoy that process. The other thing that I'm focused on doing is growing my amplifiers group. So we have a growth trajectory for that particular program, so we can help more CEOs and their teams be more wise and compassionate leaders. That's part of our mission. And from a personal point of view, I want to do more bushwalking. And so next year, after 2 years of delays, I'm finally getting to walk the Lara Pinta here. Out of Alice Springs in the middle of Australia, which is a fantastic bushwalk. It's 232 kilometers through the desert. It's spectacular. So I'm doing that in 2022. And then I've just crafted a big project, even bigger than that, with a girlfriend of mine. And we're going to walk the Australian Alpine Walking Trail, which is 650 kilometers. So what's the math on that? 300 miles or something. Takes about 2 months. So we're going to bushwalk from Victoria in Australia all the way up to the ACT, which is several kilometers later.
Wow. So bushwalking, what is that? What does that mean? Is it just a long
Oh,
walk or yeah, sorry.
it's hiking.
Okay.
No, I forget sometimes what's an Australian expression and what's North
Yes.
American. Hiking. So
Okay.
we're going to hike. We're going to go for a long
Wow.
hike, a 2-month hike. Yep.
300 miles. Why are you doing that?
Because it's something I've always wanted to do. I've had a couple of friends do this trek, and I've always thought that's just an amazing adventure to be
Yeah.
that long in the wilderness day after day.
Yeah.
Just the decompression and expansion that can happen through being in the bush for that long. Like the longest outdoor trek or adventure I've had is my 6-week canoe trips. I've had 2 of those.
Right.
And so this would be similar in epicness of the epic nature, if you like.
Yeah. Yeah.
But walking from one part of the country to another, I think, is just mesmerizing. Plus, the countryside is spectacular.
It's probably beautiful. Yeah. I imagine it's beautiful. Yeah. And so a few more questions. What do you feel? What's the difference between you when you start the walk and you when you end? Do you maybe you can talk about the canoeing? I wonder if it's almost like a spiritual experience where you feel like you're just a little bit more full.
Oh, so if we're talking about the canoe tripping experience
Mhm.
at the beginning, pretty excited about the unknown.
Okay.
And I guess this is winding back the clock almost 30 years now to my last 6-week canoe trip.
Yeah.
I remember us kind of shy around each other in some ways. Like we knew each other a little bit from having been around camp.
Yeah.
But getting into the rhythm of being together and running as a team together, and then getting to know each other and building those connections and just getting more connected with one another so that we became a family was really powerful. And then some of the places and things that we did were quite just unreal. It was a magical experience to be there.
Nice.
The transition back to regular life, I always found difficult after those kinds of adventures. After every summer, I know that my family struggled with me, and I struggled with being back in the city because I just hated it compared with being in the bush. So I had culture shock leaving the bush and going into the city life, and it got easier as I got older. But there was when I was younger, I was just did not cope. Like I didn't want to be back at school. I hated school compared to being the freedom and adventure and the connection I had on these outdoor adventures. So it was really for me like a stark, difficult transition period.
Interesting.
And I would often get really drunk and hungover. That was my emotional intelligent processing activity back then. Which wasn't that helpful.
Right.
Yeah.
Just delays it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. I think these days when I go, I still have mini adventures, nothing of that duration.
Okay.
I haven't had anything of that length for 20 years, I think. Okay. The adjustment is a little bit easier. There's still a little bit of, getting to know the people around you and adjusting back into that life. Yeah. But I think as an older person, you kind of tend to crave the comforts of home more than long for the discomforts of adventure.
Yeah. That's what I was feeling when you were sharing it. I was thinking,
it's like dirty and no showers. And,
yeah. Can you give us a couple of pieces of advice from your playbook? What can you give us one book that you would advise all women to read?
One that's really hard. Like I read a lot of books.
I know.
Yes. So it's like, oh my God, which one do I pick out of all of that?
Is there anyone that you read that gave you an aha moment, or that you were like, oh, a new thought or something like that? Is there any one? Might be more.
There are. I'll tell you about the only book I've ever read through from beginning to end and then gone back to the start and read again.
Yeah.
Immediately was Jeanette Winterson's Orange is the Only Fruit.
Okay.
I think that's the name of the title.
Okay.
Or it's either Orange is the Only Fruit or Orange is not the only fruit. I can't remember. I don't even remember the topic of I don't even remember what the book is about. I just remember reading it and being so moved by it that I went back and read it again.
Okay.
Yeah. Other personal books. I think Martha Beck's work is quite moving. I like her books. So I might just speak in categories of authors. That might be the easiest way to go than a singular book at this time, because I think books appear to the human when the human is ready to gravitate to them.
I feel that so too. Yeah, I feel that too. Yeah. Yeah.
So Martha Beck's work came to me, and that was really quite powerful. Lance Secretan, he's a leadership author. I liked his work. That was quite moving for me as well.
Okay.
And it was just magical work, as I mentioned, was Ursula K. Le Guin's books have really been powerful. And then along with that, science fiction wise, was Frank Herbert's Dune series, which was a sweeping epic. Yeah. And that one I read maybe in my early 20s and read it again 2 years ago, like the whole series. He's got, Frank Herbert wrote 6 books and then he died before finishing the last one. So his son and Kevin Anderson picked it all up and have written another 15 to 18 or more books around the whole Dune universe. So I went and read all those too. And then that was enough. I'm like, okay, enough of Dune.
Wow. Yeah. You could be a commentator, or you can do the comments on the series. So the other thing from your playbook we'd love to know is, what's one thing that you have to do every day?
Every day, I have to get outside.
Okay.
Every day. Yeah. Yes. I track about 10 different habits every day. And so the one that gives me the most joy is getting outside. Even if it's just out into my garden to look at the trees and the flowers, that's good. I at least have to do that.
Nice.
So that's one. Meditation is another. So I've had an embedded meditation practice for the last 6 years. Or 7 years. And that's been really helpful for me. I know that if I stop meditating, if I miss a day or two of meditating, that's kind of like a keystone habit. Everything else starts to get derailed. So which means it's exercise. I don't drink enough water. Don't go outside. Like everything else sort of falls apart. So, but those two, probably meditation and getting outside, are my keystone habits.
Okay. Before we close out, you have to tell us how I can, and our audience, our listeners, can get in touch with you after this podcast is over.
Thank you, Julia. Yes, you can come along to my website, which is zoerouth.com, ZOEROUTH. Like Routh is like mouth with an R.
Right.
And you can also find me on LinkedIn and all the other socials. LinkedIn is the one that I'm probably the most active on.
Okay, good. And if there's a CEO listening, how can they get to be part of your Amplifiers group?
They can get some information on our website. So just go to zoerouth.com, click on programs, and Amplifiers is listed there. Good. Or they can email me, zoe@zoerouth.com, and we can have a chat.
Good. Thank you for all the wonderful work you're doing. Please go and read and purchase the book, The People Stuff, because I really believe the people stuff is what drives everything else to either be good or bad. So thank you so much for being here, Zoe. And we look forward to hearing a lot more from you.
Thank you, Julia. I love your generosity of spirit and your kind nature. And it's been a pleasure and a privilege to be here.
You've been listening to the F50 Woman podcast. Join the F50 Woman movement and this diverse group of voices to help change the world one woman at a time. Why should you join at your age? Because we're not done yet.